So we've just finished a very interesting breakfast seminar which has been kindly hosted by EMAC, in which we discussed the enforcement of maritime claims in the UAE. In the session we went through the pre-judgment and pre-award steps that you can take in order to protect yourself, whether that's by obtaining attachments from the UAE courts, arresting a vessel to get security for your claim, or going off to the arbitral tribunal if you have an arbitration clause and getting some sort of interim relief from them. We then went through a very quick tour of how the key differences between arbitration and court proceedings, both DIFC and onshore UAE courts, and we concluded the seminar by talking about how one goes about enforcing that judgment or arbitration award once it's been obtained, whether that's through orders for sale of the property of the debtor or by executory ship arrest against a ship owner's vessel. What proactive steps can you take in order to prepare yourself in order to have the best chance of realising the enforcement of that claim? The thing we discussed quite heavily in the breakfast seminar was the precautionary and preemptive steps you can take in order to secure your claim. Now, in the UAE onshore courts, the two of the main steps a maritime claimant can take is obtaining an arrest, a precautionary arrest of the vessel, or obtaining an attachment of the assets of the debtor. Now, obtaining an arrest of a vessel has certain strict requirements, and the key one is whether or not you have a maritime debt against the debtor. And there are certain very narrowly defined maritime debts which you can then go and obtain the arrest in support of. In terms of obtaining attachments, all assets of the debtor are fair game in order to obtain an attachment, as long as they're within the UAE jurisdiction. The thing that you have to demonstrate to the courts in order to obtain the attachment is to show that there's some sort of risk of dissipation, i.e. there's a risk the debtor might move the assets that it has outside of the company into another company or out by way of dividends, something along those lines. There are two big things to take into consideration before you look at this question. The first is whether or not you have an arbitration award or whether or not you have a court judgment. And the second is which venue in the UAE are you looking to enforce in. The first being the onshore UAE courts of the 7 different Emirates, or potentially in one of the international centres that have been set up, such as the DIFC or the ADGM. In terms of arbitration awards, in enforcing those through the local courts, whether they're a foreign award or a local award, the award needs to be ratified by the UAE courts. A challenge to the award now under the arbitration law doesn't necessarily suspend enforcement, but the court does have a broad discretion to allow a stay during any challenge. And once that is dealt with, you can go off and have your ratified arbitration award by the courts and take any execution step you would have in respect of a judgment in respect to the arbitration award. In respect of a judgment, a local judgment of the UAE courts, you'd be looking at ensuring that you've gone through all of the steps required to make it final and unappealable. So either that's taking it all the way up to cassation or having your opponent stop challenging the award, the judgment, so that it is a final judgment. The DIFC courts have a different approach. They're a common law court, so they will recognise and enforce foreign judgments and foreign arbitral awards quite readily. The only issue that has really arisen in the DIFC courts is that there had developed a practice of taking foreign judgments and taking all local judgments and taking foreign arbitral awards to the DIFC courts, and then having them recognised as a DIFC court judgment, and then taking that over into the onshore courts to execute. Now that's become slightly more difficult because a committee has been set up to regulate any dispute between the jurisdiction of the DIFC courts and the local courts, and there's been a number of decisions which have limited the power of the DIFC courts to recognise foreign judgments and then export those out into the UAE. Our next question is whether the UAE courts can overrule arbitration awards which have been issued. Now, this has been a very hot topic in the UAE for many years. Historically, there was various difficulties in enforcing especially foreign arbitral awards in the UAE. Matters have changed quite significantly over the past 5 to 6 years, and that's culminated in the new 2018 arbitration law that puts in a very more pro-enforcement of arbitral awards approach into the UAE courts. And certainly our experience has been that the UAE courts are much more willing to recognise and enforce arbitral awards. The short answer to the question is the courts still have a power to either overturn a local arbitration award or refuse to recognise and enforce a foreign arbitration award. However, those grounds are quite limited and relate to issues such as public policy, invalidity of the arbitration agreement, and various other quite strict matters that are contained in the New York Convention, and from our experience are being more narrowly applied by the local courts when enforcement is taking place. I think the breakfast seminar we just had, and hopefully the answers to the questions that you've raised, have shown that the UAE is a very vibrant and interesting jurisdiction for the development of both the enforcement of its arbitration awards, the enforcement of foreign arbitration awards, and also the more easy enforcement of judgments both in the DIFC and in the local courts. Certainly our experience over the last few years is that the courts are a lot more open to parties taking either international awards or domestic awards and then enforcing those through the various mechanisms the court has available to it. The time periods for enforcement are time periods for challenging the enforcement are much narrower, and generally speaking, you can be a lot more safer in the knowledge that by choosing an arbitration clause, that'll be respected by the courts and you'll be able to go and properly enforce it. I'm very thankful to EMAC for hosting me and Stephenson Harwood for the event, and we're very much looking forward to helping the maritime community in the UAE with any issues that might arise that people have found interesting in this talk. Thank you very much.